Hello everyone. So good morning to those from Europe and good afternoon to those from Asia. I'm Fiona, the MC for the webinar today, and I'm the marketing for Global Soft Life and others, European Soft Life and others. So thank you for joining the webinar with us on the last day of June. And I'm sure everyone has been staying at home for many weeks in the past few months. I'm not sure if you are doing a lot of exercise at home or you are getting back like many people do. And so today we are going to talk about smart textile, and it is very commonly used, or it is getting more common and popular for people that are enjoying their sport and trying to boost their performance. And in this webinar, my colleague Javier is going to talk about what smart textile is and how we are going to assess the performance. And we are also going to use a good example to illustrate our solution. And similar to our webinars before, we are going to have a presentation of about 45 minutes, and then we're going to have questions for the remaining time. And also the recording and the presentation file will be shared. So I'm going to pass the time to Javier. Over to you then, Javier.
Okay, thank you, Fiona, for your introduction, and welcome everyone to this webinar on the last day of June. If you have any question during the presentation, you can type your questions in the question box, and we will try to reply as much of them by the end. And in case we don't have enough time to answer all of them during this next hour, we will do a follow-up after the webinar. Okay. So as Fiona has introduced you, we are going to talk about not only about the smart textiles, we will talk about functional textiles and the smart textile systems, which are the let's say what nowadays is becoming more popular, or that is e-textiles or wearables. It's important that we go through as well, which is the standardization and regulatory landscape nowadays, because for many companies that nowadays are working in a traditional textile manufacturing company, or a retailer that is selling normal garments as traditional garments, the jump or change to a new type of garments might imply a new regulatory landscape that is nowadays unknown. So we will do an explanation about this as well. We will show you 3 case studies of one simple product, another that is a medium, let's say medium complex, and then a very complex product, in order to see how we can assess the reliability and safety of those products. And then at the end, we will have the time to answer your questions. So the first thing that we need to do, of course, is for those that already know about this universe, because this is a new universe in the textile industry. Maybe this is already known, but I guess that should be many people that is not yet familiar or not yet totally familiar with smart textiles. So before starting and before going to more details, it's important that we define, that we keep in mind, or we define some different products or some different smart textiles that we can find in the market. So in one side, we are able to see functional textiles. So the definition is quite simple, is where we have a textile that could be a product or a fabric, where a specific function has been added by means of its material or composition or construction or their finishing. We will show in the next slide some examples of functional textiles in order that we understand a little bit in deep about this definition. By the other hand, we have the definition of a smart textile. So in here, the difference is that the smart textile is based on a functional textiles But in this case, this functional textile provides a response, in this case, to an stimulus that is provided by, for example, responding or adapting to any change on the environment. We will show as well some examples of an smart textile. It's important also to mention what is a textile system. So in here, you know that there are some specific products that are as well assembled with non-textile components. For example, we have a fabric with lighting. So in here, we would have a textile system. Or for example, if we have a textile system where we are adding a battery, then we will have as well an assembly of textile and non-textile components, and then will be also considered a textile system. And finally, we would have a smart textile system, which would be considered as an e-textile or wearable, that basically is a system which exhibits an intended and exploitable response as a reaction to changes. So it means that the changes that are happening in the smart textile are recorded, okay, in its environmental to an external signal or input. So it means that we have connectivity of this smart textile system, and the information that the smart textile is collecting from the user or the environment is being sent to another device that is connected to this textile. So these four definitions are quite important. And in the following slides, we are going to show some examples of functional textiles, of smart textiles as well. And then we will enter in deep to the definition of a smart textile system, which would be a combination of these three. So in part of, if we go to see what is a functional textile and textile materials, as we define it, is a textile product that has an added property. And in here, we are showing you some examples of the, let's say, of the result. If we want to have a functional textile that is electrically conductive, normally some examples of this performance or additions that are used are metal yarns or ceramic yarns or some polymers that are as well electrically conductive. If we want to add a functionality in order to do a garment that is fluorescent, for example, the main use is in high visibility garments. In this case, we should use a very specific kind of dyes that reflect the light in a different way. So these are just some examples of functional textiles. So in case of smart textiles, as we have been mentioning before, in this case, the smart textiles are fabrics or garments, in this case, that have a stimulus response interaction, and depending on the stimulus, we can have a different response. So in here, we are showing some of the most important, or let's say some examples of these reactions, of this when we are adding a stimulus to one smart textile, and which are the possible responses that we can obtain. These responses are dependent basically on the functionality that is added to the fabric as well. So it is very important that we understand this connection between the functionality and the smart textile. So just putting some examples, if we have an optical stimulus, we can have also an optical response that could be the photochromism. So for example, a fabric that maybe can change its color depending on the light, on the different light that is reaching the surface of the fabric. Or in other hand, we can have a response electrical by means of a photovoltaic or photoelectric effect. So we can add, let's say, a photovoltaic panel or photovoltaic yarns to one fabric in order to have an electrical response that maybe can be used to charge the mobile phone. This is something that it's already in the market. Then we can have, for example, a chemical stimulus, and depending on the response that we want to obtain, of course, the functionality to be added is different. But for example, if we want to have a response that is chemical, then we will be adding a functional chemical into the fabric in order to have a controlled release. For example, we will see an example of the products today is a textile. There are a lot already in the market. For example, we can have the example that we will see. We have one legging that is, let's say, has an addition of a cosmetic product in order to help the skin to keep moisturized. So we can have this kind of reactions. Also, for example, we can have a thermal stimulus, and one example of real products as well that can be found in the market are products with an optical response. So there are baby clothing that, for example, have one color and they react to a change on the temperature of the body user, and then they change the color. So one of the applications that this can have is, for example, the monitoring, or to understand if the baby is getting fever, for example. So these are some examples of the stimulus response options that we can have in smart textiles. And then, if you remember, before we defined as well what is a smart textile system, in here we have something that is composed of textile and non-textile parts. And basically, the smart textile system are composed of two, let's say, devices. In one side, we have one actuator that is something that is reacting to one action, okay? And then we may have an information management device. So something that is gathering this information from the user or from the fabric that where we have the smart textile system implemented, and then that is transmitting or transforming this information in order to make this information exploitable. So any one of nowadays, maybe all of you or some of you have a smartwatch. So the smartwatch itself is an information management device that is transmitting information as well to your mobile phone. So there exist already garments that are composed of these actuators and these information management devices that are sending information about the user, and the information could be very different depending on what we want to monitor. And we have the composition of the smart textile system, and then we have two main functions that can be added to this smart textile system. One is the energy function, and then we have the external communication function. It doesn't mean that all of them have both or any of them, okay? So we can have, based on this composition and these two functions, we can have 4 different categories of smart textile systems. One would be without communication and without energy, so would be called as no E, no com in this case. We can have one without communication but with energy, would be E but no com. We can have as well one category of a smart textile system with communication but without energy, that would be the no E com. And then with communication and with energy, that would be the ECOM. Okay, in this case would be the most complete one because it is having the information about the energy. We are talking energy, but could be any signal that can be recorded by the smart textile system, or by the, in this case, the information management device. And the energy could be, and the communication in this case is basically if the information that is being collected by the system, by the information management device, can be exploited or not. Okay. So as I was introducing before, for many, this is just to say, this is, as I was introducing before, this is a new universe in the textile industry. Of course, we are not going in deep on each of the categories that we can have of smart textiles, because the information to be shared with you is very huge for each of the categories. But we wanted also to do an overview of which is the standardization and regulatory landscape, because one of the challenges that the industry is going to find are this landscape regarding standards and regarding regulations that may apply to the smart textiles. So as I was mentioning before, for companies that have been working in traditional textiles, let's say, this is a new world or a new universe where they may be, or they may encounter with some burdens that they need to jump regarding standardization, but of course, and most important, regarding the regulatory landscape, because the addition of a new functionality to one product may imply that this product is never again one textile, normal textile, and then we need to jump to another regulation, or we need to observe another regulation that at this moment was not known for the company. So in case of standards, for you to know that at international level, there are three main task forces in this case. That in one side we have the CEN, the European Committee for Standardization. Then we have ISO, the International Standardization Organization. And then we have as well connected the CENELEC and the IEC, that in this case they are in charge of the electrical and electronics standard. And all of them are developing standards that are applicable to wearables, smart textiles, functional textiles, smart textile systems, and so on. But everything, as you see, is in a very early stage. There are not many standards, and there is not yet many information that can be shared or can be used in this case to, let's say, to standardize the testing of these smart textiles. Okay, we will provide you also some tips about what is important to be considered when we want to test a smart textile or a smart textile system, which are the key points that we need to take in consideration. Okay, so if you see in this case the CENTC 248 is the technical committee for textiles. They have a working group that is in charge of smart textiles. And nowadays they have published 3 documents, 3 standards or 3 technical recommendations. And they have 3 documents in draft as well. In case of ISO, we have the technical committee 38, that also is the international one in charge of textiles. And they have 2 documents in PWY, means previous working item. So it means that there is still no draft. So they are in a very, very early stage, and the discussions for this document just started. In case of CEN and CENELEC, they share the same numbering for the group. For the, let's say, the technical committee in this case, and they are in charge of as well of some standards for smart textiles, e-textiles, and wearables. In case of CENELEC, that is, let's say, is the same as CEN, they have drafted 5 documents nowadays, and the IEC have published 5 standards in this case. For some of you, maybe you find or you consider that this is a lot of information, but considering the number of possibilities and the number of standards that are already in the market for specific products, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So there should be, in the near future, more standards than the ones that are already drafted. It's important to mention that in here, we are talking about general textiles, okay? If we go to specific products, like for example, PPEs, the PPEs technical committee in ISO or in Europe, in the CN, they are also working in some, let's say, smart textiles or smart PPEs standards, and they have also some previous working items. I think that there are 5 or 6 standards that are under discussion and under development. And one of the examples that we will show about a real product is precisely one PPE. So in order that you can see which is the complexity to standardize them and to evaluate the safety of these products. In these slides, I'm not going to read each of the standards that we have in draft or that have been published. You can see these ones we shared the presentation, but you can have an overview of which are the standards that are under the scope of each of the committees for standardization. As I was mentioning, we have some published documents, and then we have some preliminary documents. In this case, for CEN, we have 1 technical recommendation and 2 standards published, and 3 items that are in this is in preliminary work, and this is already a draft or a final draft of a technical recommendation for smart textiles in this case. And as I was mentioning, here we are talking only about general textiles. PPEs, as an example, is another thing. Then for ISO, we have also these 2 documents that are in previous working items. So it means, although we already have the numbering, we don't have yet the draft document, okay? And the same we can find for the Senelec and the IEC, okay? So now jumping from standard from the standardization landscape to the legislative framework, talking in this case about Europe. So if you in this case are aware about which are the regulations that are mainly applicable to general apparel or general textile products, we need to observe basically these 5 regulations that we have at the top. In one side, we have in Europe the directive, the General Product Safety Directive, which is applicable to all consumer products except food. Then we would have the regulation regarding composition and labeling of this composition of textile products. We would have 2 chemical regulations that are applicable to the apparel or textile products itself. In one side, we will have the regulation 2019-1021 regarding the persistent organic pollutants. So there is a restriction of chemicals that can reach the environment, and where we have a list of substances that are restricted, and it's applicable on textile. And of course, we have the REACH regulation, which is bespoken, and everyone knows about this regulation. And additionally, we may have responsibilities, or may be applicable as well to apparel and apparel products, the directive regarding packaging and packaging waste, that also has an RSL, a restricted substances list, that may apply in this case to the packaging if the product is provided with this packaging. But imagine when we are talking about this is a general textile, we would need to observe mainly these regulations, as I was explaining. But then we can have a product, a functional textile or a smart textile or a smart textile system, where we have additional properties or additional add-ins and a different maybe final use of the product. So we would need to observe a higher number of regulations. In here, we are not listing all regulations that we have in Europe, just some of them as an example, but imagine that we have a textile where we are adding a chemical to be released. We may have responsibility regarding the CLP regulation. This CLP regulation is as regards of the labeling and packaging of chemicals. So if we are adding a chemical that would be intentionally released in one product, we may have some responsibilities regarding this regulation in terms of labeling and packaging. In the same way, if we are adding a biocidal treatment to one fabric, so we will have a functional fabric with a biocidal treatment, we are adding a chemical in this case that might be restricted, and we would need to be observing the regulation regarding the biocidal products. When we talk about textile systems or smart textile systems, where we have additions, for example, of electrical and electronic components, we would need to observe the ROS directive, that in this case is the restriction of hazardous substances in electrical and electronic products. So if we have a product that is containing lighting and batteries and any electrical and electronic component, this directive would be applicable. The same would happen if we have a battery as well. We would need to comply with the directive applicable to batteries. This directive that we mentioned here as WEE is regarding the waste of electrical and electronic products. So when we have a garment where we have some electrical and electronic features that have been added, the product still keeps the essence of being a textile, but in a second line is considered as an electrical and electronic product. And regarding the waste of electrical and electronic products, we would need to observe as well which are the responsibilities that we have in from this directive. The same we would have, for example, with the EMC or the LVD, and that is for low voltage. Then we may have, for example, some additions to one product that convert the product in a PPE. For example, if we are adding some properties to filter the UV light in one product, in Europe, the UPF, the ultraviolet protective garments are considered a PPE, so we would need to comply with this regulation, the PPE regulation. Or if we are adding, let's say, some features that are used to monitor the health of the user, maybe the product can fall in the regulation for medical devices. So we would need to observe all these medical devices, all these regulations. As I was mentioning, this is just an example. We may have some additional regulations that are applicable to the product. It depends mainly on the claims. It depends on the add-ins, the additions that we have on the product, and then the final use. Additionally, it's important to mention that some of the above regulations and directives that we are listing here may require the CE marking and specific or special conformity assessment procedures. This is something that in a general applicable, in a general textile, we don't have a special or a specific conformity assessment procedures, but if, for example, the product besides being a textile itself is regarded as a PPE, then we would need to follow a specific conformity assessment procedures. We might need to go through a notified body in the European Union. We would need to demonstrate compliance with a specific standard. We would need to draw some technical documentation and so on. So the work to be done when entering in the smart textiles universe is quite a lot for the people that is new in this universe. So as we were mentioning before, due to this landscape that we have in terms of regulation and in terms as well of, in this case, I will say lack of standards, because we don't have many standards, which are the key points that we consider that are important for this standardization and testing. So in here on this slide, I am not mentioning that, of course, the most important part would be to observe first which are the regulations that are applicable to the product. So we would need to understand very well the product, and I would need to understand very well which are the main features of my product. But besides that, then if we need to apply for a specific testing, and we don't have a specific standards that are applicable to my product, which are, let's say, the steps or the key points that I would need to consider for testing. So, of course, the first thing always is that if I have a claim performance or a claim feature, this need to be checked. It's very important that if we are declaring one product as breathable, then we check the breathability of the product. Otherwise, if we are not checking it and the product is not really breathable, we will be falling in a misleading advertisement of the product. Additionally, it's very important that we check the innocuousness of the product. So it means that the product is not dangerous for the user, and also this is not dangerous to the environment. So in here we would need to observe if there are regulations, as we see, there are many regulations that are applicable in terms of innocuousness and environmental aspects, like the REACH regulation or POPs regulation. We would need to assess as well the durability of the product or the durability of the claim performance or the durability of the feature that we are declaring. So it's very important that the verification of these claim performances is done, of course, in original, and then after the use of the product. It could be after washing, it could be after wearing, or after exposing the product to an external, let's say, aging, like could be the light. So it's very important that we assess as well this durability in order to not fall as well in misleading advertisement to the final customer. And finally, it's very important that we make an evaluation of which is the information that we are going to provide and which is the information that I need to provide as well. As I was explaining you before, in many regulations, we have a specific chapters, let's say, or a specific articles on each of the regulations regarding the product information. Also, many of the standards are already covering this part about which is the minimum information that I need to provide to the user in order to make a safe use of the product, in order to let him or her know how to keep or maintain the product, the maximum durability, the instructions for assembly or disassembly, and so on. So it's very important that we observe as well which is this information to be provided. So these 5 key points are very important to be kept in mind. And as I was mentioning, this can be done through the use or through the applicability of the existing regulations and standards, or if not, laboratories like ours can assess your company, which would be the minimum testing, or in this case, the minimum key points that would need to be observed depending on the product. So as you can see, the applicability or the uses that we can have of smart textiles is, we cannot say infinite, but the range of products that can be invented is very huge. So depending on the type of product and the outcome, the evaluation to be done is very different. And this is what we will be showing you. But you can see the applications that we can have of smart textiles passes through, for example, to the monitoring of health and safety, for example, for babies or for adults or for professional and non-professional athletes in this case. And also we can have some other applications, like in here we have an example of shielding women from assaults, but we can have textiles that are able to convert the sunlight into an electrical output to charge batteries as well, for example. So the applications that we can have are let's say infinite. It depends on the imagination of who is designing the smart textile. And in here we want to show you 3 case studies, 3 examples of products, and explaining which are the purposes of the products, and then which are the key points that would need to be evaluated. So one example that is, let's say in this case, the simpler one would be a cosmeto textile that is in this case a legging, which is incorporating a moisturizing microencapsulated ingredients that in this case are released gradually to the body skins by friction. So when we are using these microencapsulated ingredients, the microcapsules are broken, and then the moisturizing agent is liberated. So in this case, the legging still continues being a legging, a textile, normal garment, but additionally, besides what is generally applicable to this textile, we would need to evaluate the efficacy of the product, because we are claiming that the product is moisturizing, so we would need to evaluate the efficacy. Then, if you remember, we have been talking about let's say the environmental and the innocuousness of the product. So we would need to evaluate if the ingredients are safe. So in this case, as the product is incorporating cosmetic agents, we would need to observe the compliance with the cosmetics directive in Europe, and then we can conduct as well some user panel test in order to evaluate if there is any skin reaction or any allergy and so on. Of course, we would need to evaluate how long these microcapsules withstand the washing, because this garment would be sold as possible to be washed, of course, and we would need to know how many washes these microcapsules are going to stay in the garment. So this is something that needs to be evaluated. And finally, and of course, we will need to understand how we need to label this product, because besides what's applicable to the textiles, we may have some additional information that need to be provided as regards of the cosmetic directive, like for example the list of ingredients, or if there is any warning that need to be provided to the user regarding any allergies and so on. Then we have a medium complex product that in this case would be a smart textile system. In this case, with many different features that are declared, we have an electrode top. Basically, in this example that we are providing you here, the top is collecting the wearer's body data, such as the heart rate and the perspiration level. And this, let's say, in here we have an actuator and an information management system that is transmitting or transferring this data to a mobile application in this case. The top as well is marketed as breathable, moisture wicking and blocking the UV. So if you see in here, we have a potpourri of different features and different add-ins. So the more add-ins and the more features, the more complex to evaluate the product. So we would need to classify very well the product. So it's an apparel because the main use is to dress someone, is to be wearing it. And then we would need to go through each of the add-ins that have been declared in order to check that they are that the product is really complying with each of them. So we would need to check that the product is breathable. We would need to assess the quantity of moisture that the product is wicking. Then we would need to evaluate as well if the product is, of course, protecting against the UV radiation. In this case, besides being an apparel, as we have declared a functionality to protect the user, we would have in here a product that is considered a PPE in Europe. Okay, we are talking. And then we would need also to understand the durability of the product. And then in here, we are not entering in the, let's say, in the non-textile part, but in here we put the example about the data collection regulations. You know that when you download one app and you introduce your personal data, and in this case you are, let's say, linking information regarding your health, there are strict or very strict regulations regarding the data protection, at least at European level. So these data protection regulations would need to be observed as well. And finally, we have, in this case, a more complex example. It's an extreme one that we are talking here. We have mainly the main use of this is a PPE because it's a firefighting wear. That in this case, we have that is fitted with battery operated sensors, which are monitoring similar to before. In this case, we are monitoring location and any exposure to hazardous gases. This information is transmitted as well in real time to a central that is called a central controlling management unit, which is monitoring the activity of the firefighting team. So in here, of course, we would need to comply with what is applicable to the PPEs. But imagine we are putting one battery, that this is an electrical and electronic product, to one product for people that is working in a very explosive environment. So they have the risk of explosions as well. So besides the PPE regulation, one of the regulations that we have not mentioned before is the one that is applicable to the explosive atmospheres, that is the ATEX regulation. So in this case, besides complying with the regulation, the product would need to comply as well with the explosive atmospheres regulation. And for the electrical and electronic part, we would need to observe compliance as well in the mean of applicable about the restriction of hazardous substances in the electrical and electronic products. And then as applicable, we would need to observe the compliance with the low voltage directive, with the electromagnetic compatibility, and then as well as an example with the portable batteries regulation. And additionally, as we have here, for example, a product that is transmitting a signal, let's say in distance, okay, we would need to observe as well, it depends on, in this case, on the connectivity that we have, but we would need to observe compliance as well with the directive on the radio equipment. So as you see, we can have smart textiles very simple, where a very simple feature has been added, like for example, moisturizing or wicking, that helping to wick out the the moisture or the sweat, but we can go and arrive to have a very, very complex product with it's fitted with many sensors and many different features. So the complexity of the product and the addition that we have on the product is what will be defining, let's say, the product compliance scope. So it's very important that in this case you count with a good laboratory partner that is, in this case, let's say, professional and aware of all these regulations, not only an expert in what is smart textiles, but also an expert in the standardization and regulatory scenario. And for you, as you know, for those that know already Eurofins, you already know that we cover all of these regulations, but for the ones that are not very familiar with Eurofins, it's good for you to know that we have presence and expertise on all these different industries. So basically, till here is the deep of the presentation. Of course, if you have further questions after the webinar that are not coming to your head right now, then you can ask us by email. And I think that we had some questions during the...
So Javier, I'll let you to take a look at the question first. So, and I think you have introduced a lot of new knowledge and people take some time to think over it. And when Javier is reviewing the questions, so I just want to make sure that and keep it note that, like I have said at the beginning of the webinar, the recording and the presentation file will be shared. So make sure you have our email shown on the slide here. You have them added to the save list, so the email doesn't end up in your junk box or get blocked by your email system. So
okay.
Can we get to our first question down here?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first one, I think it is very common, quite common, or a common thinking among the audience. So I guess many of them have not yet produce any smart textile. So is it common at the moment? How common is it in the market now?
So I would say that in this case, in normal textiles or in traditional textiles is not yet common, but is, I mean, it's not something for the future. It's something for the present because it's already happening. Of course, there are very specialized companies that are offering these products, and mainly its applicability is let's say is being promoted for very specific uses, like for example sports or health and safety, but I'm pretty sure that in the near future we would see a normal garment with some add-ins or some more properties added than normal.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is about the regulations requirements. So Java, you have talked about quite a couple of requirements on smart textile for the European market in section 2. So is there anything similar for the US market or other markets?
Yes, in this case, the answer is that, of course, each of the markets have their own different regulations, and depending on the market that we want to sell or to offer the product, we would need to observe the different regulations that are applicable. So if we are talking, for example, about PPEs, the regulations that we have in the US are different than the ones that we have in Europe. And then there are also requirements for, as an example, for electrical and electronics. We have as well regulations and standards that are applicable regarding chemicals and so on. So they are similar, but not equivalent, let's say.
Yeah, so in case you want to sell to the US market, you are welcome to contact us and we will give you some tailored suggestions and solutions. Right, so here we come to our last question on hand. I guess it's an easy question.
Yeah.
Is smart textile also applicable to footwear and other accessories?
Yeah, the answer, of course, is that yes. In here, we have been talking about smart textiles, talking about textile as an industry, but of course that there are small accessories, like for example, we can already see in the market products such as a luggage or a bag that is connected to your mobile phone and is following you when you are in the airport. So you have behind you your luggage and the luggage is running behind you. So of course, there are many applications in many different consumer products. We have touched today only what is applicable in textiles, but the same could be applicable in footwear and in other kind of accessories, of course.
I think we also see some smart wallet that give you some alerts when people are opening your wallet or or you can locate your wallet when you
Yeah,
need something like
exactly.
that. Yeah.
So
Right. So
the applications are I would say infinite because it depends on the imagination of the one that is designing the product.
yeah. So I hope the webinar today gives our audience some good inspiration on what they're going to do next, apart from those traditional footwear and garment items, and so they can explore other market segments. And so I'm at the moment I'm pasting the email of our email so that you can add it to the save box easily instead of typing it. So let's move on to next slide. So we're just going to do a little information sharing here. So we're not sure if you are going to produce medical face masks or more commonly the community mask that in most of the European countries that are we compulsory to put on or public to put on in public area like public transport or in some areas. So if you are looking for a testing solution for either medical face mask or community mask, we can also handle the mask testing. And let's move on to last slide.
Yeah.
Right. So I hope you have enjoyed the webinar like we had before. And here is Javier email in case you want to reach him for any questions on smart textile or other textile product regulations or compliance. Feel free to email him anytime. And I hope we'll see you again in our upcoming webinar. And until we meet again, I hope you all stay safe and healthy. Thank you again for your time with us today. Have a nice day. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Fiona.